Hello and welcome to Movie Magpies. Today we'll be reviewing Surf's Up. I'm Monique and I'm here with my co-host Will.
Alright, so for this review, we should just start by saying what we thought of it. What did you think?
I think this is an iconic movie. It's a quintessential 2000s animated penguin movie, which I didn't think would be a genre until I realized that it was watching this movie. I really, really liked the fact that they do sort of the mockumentary style, but it's all animated, so they're putting in that extra layer on top of stuff. It's super interesting to see. What about you?
Well, here's the thing. I chose this movie, and I chose it for a very specific reason. Mostly because I wanted to talk about an animated film at some point, and I think Surf's Up is definitely one of the best, especially for its time. It absolutely leaps and bounds over most animated films that came out around this time. I know that Happy Feet came out a little while before this, and Surf's Up is almost certainly the better of the Penguin movies that have
Like
been
I
released.
said, it's weird that there's a genre about 2000 penguin movies, like the 2000s era
Yeah, I
penguin
think people were
movies.
really into penguins at that
I
point.
mean, who doesn't love penguins? It's super interesting that you think this is one of the better animated pictures out because it was nominated for Best Animated Feature, but
Yeah.
it lost to Ratatouille.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. Ratatouille's got a very great heritage. We won't talk about Ratatouille because we'll talk about it eventually at some point. But Ratatouille also had Disney behind it, so it had that
True.
leg up. But Surf's Up was nominated for an Oscar, and I think genuinely the reason why that is because there is so much effort and intention put into this film, because nothing is put into an animation that wasn't intended to be in there.
Which is super interesting. I also love this sort of era of movies where you were still getting a lot of like end credit scenes, especially in animated movies because they're very intentionally putting that in there. It's not just like a funny short that they decided to add at the end. Like
Yeah.
they animated every frame of that last sort of credits a scene, which is super interesting to me.
Yeah.
I just feel like animated movies get a bad rap because they've always got so much effort put into them.
Well, good animated films don't deserve that for sure. I think,
Controversial?
well, yeah, I don't think it's controversial to say that animated films that were made purely for the sake of monetary gain and profit, not to name any examples, but the Emoji Movie, they do
Oh,
badly because they're terrible and people don't put the effort in to
I
them.
didn't even that I regressed that memory.
Yeah.
What's the Emojis movie?
There are
Haven't heard of her, don't want to see her.
there are definitely bad animations, but Surf's Up definitely isn't one of them.
I think it really leads itself on well, and I think it did very well slash holds up because it didn't take that sort of more kids film route that a
Yeah.
lot of these animated movies do. It stayed in that more sort of comedic mockumentary. Yes, it's still a G-rated movie, but things don't have to have adult themes to be entertaining and funny.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. In terms of monetary gain, it was produced for a budget of 100 million and made back 152 million. So genuinely quite a profitable return. But that's because they went into making a animated film that they wanted to make. I don't think if you asked
Yeah.
anyone during that point in time, oh, do you want to watch a film that's a documentary about penguins surfing? People would go, no, that sounds like crap. But it's actually a really amazing film that reflects on the nature of winning.
And I sort of enjoy that your main character, he's there, but it's not just him that the story is about. I'm trying to stay quite spoiler free here. But I really like that the sort of mentors that he has also go on a bit of a journey and sort
Well,
of
that
have their own growth.
well, that's just good character writing. All characters should be going on some sort of arc.
Yeah, I feel that's fair. It's just usually, if they're not the main character, I feel like the arc usually gets pushed a little to the background. It shouldn't be that way, but it usually is, so it's nice to see a movie that has that balance where most arcs are treated the same.
Yeah, in that case, yeah, fair enough.
Look, I don't have a lot of gripes with this movie. One of the only ones that I have is sometimes the humor can be like a little bit repetitive, but It's not, anything too big for the movie that it is. Yeah, the humor's going to repeat a little bit, and sometimes it's nice that it repeats. It gives you a bit of a, oh, they've still got that same like through line through. I just think that sometimes they do a couple of the more slapstick jokes a little too often.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I genuinely found that the best humor in this film was the documentary based humor, in that
Hmm.
the format, and I'll talk about this more in depth later, but the format of documentary film really lends well to this new style of storytelling and filmmaking, in that there's some really funny stuff that's only possible because it's done as a documentary, and as like you assume that there are actually penguins carrying camera gear and recording gear around with them on the island, and the humor only really translates well because they have that fourth wall break, or that immersion, because you
Hmm.
know that there are penguins carrying around these cameras asking these questions, getting this footage for a specific reason to tell the story that they are telling through the documentary.
I think one of my favorites about that is the way that they use the unreliable narrator trope and use their like sort of documentary style breaking of the fourth wall
Yeah.
to immediately like absolutely smack you with the fact that this person is trying to make themselves sounds better. Like, oh, I was pretty cool about it. Cut to them being like ecstatic and like jumping up and down and being way too excited. Like, it's just very amusing. And you wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't in the sort of documentary style, because you
Yeah.
wouldn't have any way of showing the unreliable narrator stuff.
And I love how that stuff is done, because it isn't there as a means of deceiving the audience. It's there because it helps facilitate the story and characters' individual character arcs, because it's not even an unreliable narrator kind of issue. It's actually, because of the format, it's more that the characters have their own self-interest in mind, and their self-perception is more at the forefront of their responses. So
Yeah.
so usually the characters who are unreliable in their narration or in their interviews are less self-actualized than the characters who are more honest. Of course, we'll talk about that later in the in-depth review.
We'll get
So
into that
yeah.
more in depth. I suppose I don't have much to say about this one, actually.
No.
Like, that's sort of really my only gripe is I've got a couple more, but they're for the more in depth discussion.
Yeah.
Really, my only gripe is sometimes the humor can be a bit repetitive, just in them either repeating the same joke in a different area or having a lot of the same styles of joke. There's not much that you can do about that. Like, every movie has its flaws, but the visual style is really easy to get lost in. They do a really good transition between the more sort of mockumentary stuff into the like more, is cinematic the word when it's
Yes.
animated? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
It's all you. The term cinematic is in reference to cinema, so of course it can be used universally for animation and for
Look,
film,
it's
because it.
taken us
Yeah.
up to recording our fourth episode.
Epidode.
Yep, I just
Yeah.
proved my point. It's taken up to the fourth episode for me to even be able to pronounce cinematic correctly.
Mm.
So I'm never gonna know if I'm using it in the right way.
In regards to the humor being repetitive, I actually I'm more than happy for you to hold that belief, because ultimately differences is what makes this more enjoyable, because we don't have the same views. But I actually found that the humor was more subtle, and that it was used very sparingly in most sections.
Oh yeah, the I only noticed the humor was repetitive because I was analyzing the film. Like, it's if I was watching it normally, I probably wouldn't have had an issue with it. It's just that when I was writing notes, I found that I got to a point where I was like, I can't really write notes about this because it's kind of the same thing that happened a couple scenes ago. For the general watcher, because of course I do recommend you see this film,
Yeah.
they're probably not going to pick up on it. It's very much more something that I picked up on because I was digging into the film. Like, if I wasn't digging into the film, I wouldn't have had an issue with it at all.
Right. Okay, that's fair enough. But as I was saying, it's more. I think it's more your noticing of it that may not be as universal, because I was also nitpicking at it and I didn't notice the same thing as you. But that doesn't matter, because ultimately that's not the point. It's that humor translates to people in different ways. So either way, I think it still does a good job in keeping a balance, even though it can be quite for some people it can be quite repetitive. It may not be quite as the humor may not be quite as enjoyable for some people as it is for others, and I think that's just humor. So I think that's
Oh,
good that our difference is in the sense of humor was
yeah,
in the
yeah,
film.
exactly. I
Yeah,
mean, like I said, if I wasn't picking at the film, I probably wouldn't have had an issue with it at all. And even then, it's a very, very small issue. There's only like I said, like 2 or 3 nitpicks that I have in this film in its entirety, and
yeah,
they're all very, very superficial, or what's the word? Subjective.
yeah.
Yep, there you go.
That's
Look at
correct.
me. I'm
That's a
using big
correct term.
words.
It's not a big word. It's quite
It's
a
a
short
big
word.
word. Shh. I'm smart.
No, but I actually did want to ask you, how did you feel about the character Lani?
She's really good as a character. I felt like she didn't get a lot of growth
Yeah, because
comparatively.
this is my one gripe with the film. My one
hmm
criticism of the film is that she is horrifically underutilized.
I think you and I have one of the same gripes because I was like, she's really cool. She's like our
Yeah,
only female character. And
pretty
they just
much. And that's actually a real shame, isn't it?
don't do much with her. Yeah, this is not a movie that'll pass the vegetal test, but
Yeah, I would even say it might even pass it just because she has so little to do. But
she's
in it,
always talking about like a man.
yeah, that is a very fair point, honestly. But it's like, can that even be possible where like the only female character has so little to talk about, or has such little prominence in a film that she passes on a
Yeah,
technicality or
it's
through a
like
loophole?
it's one of those
This
things
is an
where I
in-depth
think
conversation, I think.
we should leave it. Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say it's one of those things where I think we should leave it for our bigger
we'll talk
conversation.
about it at another
But
time.
I
But
definitely agree with you. We definitely have the same gripe here.
I want to ask about something very specific. How did you feel about the water animation?
Why do I feel like this is a test?
It's not a test. It's not a test. I want to ask your genuine opinion.
I think it's done really well because obviously you've got to
Oh, no, I'm
sort
joking.
of walk this. Mm. You
It's
got to
not a
walk this
test.
line between stylized and realistic, and I feel like with the animation style of the movie, it works pretty well. I will say that, like comparatively to the sand, it feels a little more fake. Like it feels like they did a really good job rendering the sand, and then we're just like, yeah, just stick a cartoon wave on it. But didn't really pick it as something
That's
to.
yeah, that's a fair observation, I think. Because I'm gonna say I think the water animation and the sea animation is incredible. So this film came out in 2017.
2007.
Oh no, that's Surf's Up 2. We're not talking about that film. So it came
No,
out.
I don't
That's
think we'll
even
ever watch
better.
that film.
That's even better. So this film came out in 2007. The water animation for its time is incredible because it has
Oh,
different variation. I'm not arguing your point because you're also very much right. They had to find a balance between stylized and realistic because this is a stylized film. These are penguins we're talking about. But I think that the water is just so nicely done that I noticed that throughout the film where the ocean has changes in hue and in saturation throughout the film, but it all makes sense and it's really, really amazing, and it just lends to, again, it lends to the amount of work that went into animation for such little things like the sand, because like you said, the sand animation is also really fucking good. It's just
yeah,
yeah.
and I suppose when I say comparatively to the sand, the wave looks a little cartoony. I only noticed that because I have the Wikipedia up and I'm looking at the like movie poster, and that's the only reason that I would pick it.
I
When you're
think
actually watching the movie,
I think using
can't
the
really see it.
the movie poster is a little unfair because that's a poster and it's a
Yeah,
picture. But
exactly. That's why I wanted to
I'm not
mention
going to
it.
disagree with you in that. Ultimately, it's 2007. If it didn't look a little cartoony, I'd be surprised.
If it didn't look a little cartoony, would it have the same nostalgia factor?
Probably not. It's sea. I think everyone can identify with the ocean, but well, some people can, I guess. But yeah, I think for me, in terms of this film, I found it very hard to criticize too much about it, especially even with the Lani stuff. I can kind of not understand it because like ultimately give your female characters a little more to do and give them a little more agency, not just a man and stuff like that. But even with that, I could still, I'm almost like looking for words not to use, but I could still wholeheartedly enjoy this film because so much of it is just so good. And I'll break down the technical stuff of what I found incredibly amazing in how much effort they put into animation, because there's so many like little things that made this film incredible, in that the camera specs and the camera settings within the film actually change depending on location, and little things like that which I absolutely loved, because coming from someone who does cinematography and absolutely adores camera and film technology, it was really amazing to see that these animators who didn't need to put this stuff in at all took the time to do that.
It truly is a movie that you can tell was a labor of love, and it really benefits because of that. It's got a really, really strong story. The animation is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Documentary style makes for really good comedy. Like I said, I have 2 to 3 gripes with this, and they're all incredibly superficial or subjective. It's just stuff to pick on, you know? It's not anything ridiculously annoying.
Yeah, no, there are no... I feel like this is bold of me saying this, but there's no critical failings in this film.
I would agree.
And I think that's what makes it so good, and it's why I really, really enjoyed it. I will also pull back the curtain here for a little bit, in that while I was studying film, this was one of the films that we were forced to watch as our lecturer paused it incessantly, and he would just talk about single frames in the film. And for someone who grew to fall in love with film and cinematography and making films and doing all of that, it was one of these things where, since this was the film that we started with, it ingrained in me a sense that slowing down a film and looking at it never had to be a bad thing, because this film is just so wonderful and so beautiful to just pause and look into, that it just became, okay, I'm just going to be honest, this film led me to want to do stuff like this, where I break down films and talk about them, because there's a merit to breaking stuff down.
You're one of my favorite people. I just love hearing you talk about your passions. Oh my gosh, you're so sweet. I love
this.
The backstory. You're regretting this?
No, I'm gonna cut it. I'm gonna cut it. Gonna cut it from the podcast. No one needs to know.
I just like hearing you talk about it, and the fact that this, the pulling back of the curtain, and this is one of the movies that you watched when you were studying. I'm just like, oh, it makes my heart all warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, well, ultimately, and it's why I wanted to talk about the film so early on, because I love this film. Some people won't have the same opinions as me. That's totally fine. As I've said with previous reviews, it's absolutely okay if you don't agree with me. I'd love to know why you don't agree with me, because ultimately that's discourse, and that makes learning all the more interesting. But for me, this film is one of the quintessential movies that you have to watch if you love film. And people will say, wait, but it's an animation. I'm like, exactly, because everything in this film is intentional. And it's one of the things that I've heard directors and film directors talk about constantly, is that, oh, we like to pretend that everything in film is intentional, but there's going to be stuff that is added in accidentally, and it'll turn out for the betterment of the film, and we just go, oh yeah, we intended to do that. With animation, that's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's possible in a microcosm, in that there might be a minute modeling mistake that leads to something very cool. I can't think of an example, but sometimes that happens.
Yeah, I suppose in a more motion stop animated movie, there could be more mistakes that work with the film. But
yeah,
I suppose I really understand what you're saying. Everything is intentional. And for me, I really love this movie because it's so sound. Even if you do look into this movie, you can't really pick it apart like, say, we have with previous films.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
I was going to say, if you break this film down into its most minute parts, the film still works. And as a result, it's impossible to go, oh, because of this one thing that happens, oh, Cody's from Antarctica, this film doesn't work because of this reason. That you can't do that with this film, because everything does work in it.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose for me, it's also the perfect little microcosm of one of my favorite things, which is things don't have to be complicated to be good. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you can have a very simple but deep and meaningful movie or overarching theme, and it all works perfectly well. Like you don't have to overcomplicate things just to make your movie seem smarter or like better.
Yeah, I just had a thought. Because I asked about Lani, I think I should also do the justice of all the other characters. So what did you think about our main character, Cody?
I really like Cody. I think he's characterized really well. You sort of can tell that he's on the younger side.
Yeah.
For anybody, I don't think this counts as a spoiler. He's considered to be 17 in like the movie, I
Yeah,
believe.
he is. He is.
So, he's got that very like big vibe about him. I also enjoy that his arc was more about learning. Actually, we'll keep that for the in-depth conversation.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, since you brought up character arc, I think his character arc is really great because it's so effortlessly done. Cody's character arc isn't like a brick that's being smashed into your face. It's very subtle and beautifully done because it almost feels like it's happening naturally. He's never forced to take on new ideas, or he's never put into a place of conflict that he didn't go there himself or volunteer to go into himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I really love about it is, and I said that I love how even with some of the background characters, their development is made equal or very balanced with Cody's development through the film. I actually even think at times, because of the way that they've subtly weaved Cody's development throughout the film, there are a couple times where I was like, oh, his development isn't the main point of the film, which I still don't think it is, but for different reasons than when I was actually watching through.
Yeah, that's fair. I hold a slightly different belief that his arc is almost not the main foundation of the film, but the film couldn't happen without this arc.
It's like a tiny little microcosm of what the film's overall theme is.
Yeah, and it's held quite well because it all meshes into itself, and I think you could definitely argue that Cody's character arc is reflected in so many different parts of the film, not just himself but through other characters and areas like that, where it could be argued that his character arc doesn't necessarily matter, but I think it's also purely because I think it's more because his character arc is reflective within the story as opposed to it being repeatable or similar to others.
Yeah, like his character arc, I would say, you said quote unquote doesn't matter, but it's the catalyst for a lot of other arcs in the movie. So like as much as it's a very, very personal, subjective arc for Cody himself, the things that he's doing then spark the growth in other characters, which I really like. It's what makes him the main character. It's not that his growth is like the be-all, end-all. There's no like, if he doesn't have growth by the end of the movie, then the film meant nothing stakes. It's just that because he's so, I suppose, he's got such a big personality, and I suppose because of that, he ends up becoming one of the things that sparks a lot of other characters along their journeys, which I really like. I like that the main character here is the main character because he's touching all of the other characters' arcs in some way or another.
I do love that, but I think we'll reserve a little time for one of the main antagonists, so Tank. So personally, I have a belief that he's not the main antagonist, but we'll get into that in depth later. What do you think of Tank?
I think he's very funny. Like,
he's good.
There's only like in this movie, because it's such a feel good movie, I don't genuinely like dislike any of the characters. You've got your two like the more main antagonists in the movie, but even the antagonists, I think like I was just like he's big and he's very, very full of himself, and he's quite amusing. He's got beefy, dumb, mean energy, and I love it about him.
Yeah, but he's also got this very enjoyable confidence about him, in that when he's being interviewed, he doesn't lie. He's never an unreliable narrator in his interviews, which I actually really love because he's exactly what he says he is, and he's a dick, basically, which is a lot of fun. I do like, this is completely unrelated, but I just want to say this straight up, I do really like that there's an Australian penguin.
It's very,
Yeah.
I
But
like the way that they did that.
I will say there's, so if you haven't seen this, there's an Australian penguin, but there are a lot of really nice scatterings of unique and individualistic penguins, so it doesn't feel like outside of the main characters there are just like cardboard cutouts of penguins who are just not important to the story. You actually get a nice variation of different characters who may only appear in background roles, but because they exist, it gives the film so much more depth.
Yeah, and
I really like that.
I really like the way that they've used the different species of penguin to like pull into character design and
Yeah.
like lean into vibes. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's the word that I want, but like you can look at a
Sure.
character design and just based on the species of penguin, I can immediately tell like the personality of the penguin that they've made. Like they've done
Yeah.
a really good job meshing species with, I don't have any other word than vibe or personality,
Vibe works.
even background characters. That's
Yeah.
good vibes.
I it's such a tiny thing, but I also do really love that each penguin has their own like unique fur design or feather pattern. I think
Yeah,
that's a lot of fun.
Like for instance, Tanks looks like he has tattoos, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Leans into his like big tough muscle man
Mm.
vibe, which is I just love it. I love the fact that they went to all the effort to get the different species of penguin. I'm very very excited about this movie.
yeah. It's such a lovely little film. Also, just for people who are asking, who may be asking, how long is the film? Is it something that I actually have to spend a good period of time just watching? It's an hour 25 minute. It was made during a time where films didn't have to be 3 hours long to just be good.
Bring
It's-
back hour-long feel-good movies.
That'd be really nice, but it's a film that is remarkably easy to watch. It's got really good pacing. I don't think either one of us have written notes about pacing, but the pacing
No.
is really good in that you get from point to point really solidly, not quickly. You get to from point to point really well, and you don't feel like you've left anything behind. It all makes its way through the story quite well, and I really like that because
Yeah.
yeah, I think the writing in this film is done remarkably well in that there are no loose ends, and so much is done so well within the writing where characters have full, complete arcs and characters who don't necessarily have big arcs actually still have this closure, and it all works out really well.
I'm completely in agreement with you here. And I think actually with the pacing, that's something that I want to talk a little more in depth about.
Yeah, of course.
I don't have much else to say about this film in our sort of review period, do you?
I don't think I do. I think this is all I have to say for the main review, other than I really, really enjoy this film, and there's so much to enjoy about this film. But if you want to hear my full points, go to the in-depth one, because I want to talk in depth about this.
Alrighty, in that case, do you want to give us your rating for the film?
Of course. This week we are giving a rating of squid sticks. For me, I gave it an 8.5 out of 10 squid sticks. I think this film is a testament to the potential of good animated films. Nothing is in it by accident, and as a result, the film manages to age well, even under heavy criticism. That being said, I only recently found out that there's a sequel, and the sequel was straight to DVD and absolute garbage. So, yeah.
I think I messaged you and I was like, did you know there was a sequel? And you were like, we're not watching that.
Before starting this episode, I actually looked at the trailer and I was like, holy fucking shit, this is absolute garbage.
I read the plot synopsis.
Oh, it's
for the
terrible.
sequel.
It's so bad.
Oh, I'm so amused. But anyway, we
Yeah.
digress.
It's not important.
I suppose in my case, my rating, I actually changed my rating while we were talking about it, to
That's
7 out of 10.
dishonest. No, it's totally fine.
Rude. I changed it to 7 out of 10 squid sticks, and it's a really good film. You don't have to look too in depth into it to enjoy it, like it's not too complicated, and I love all of the sort of background things like the different penguin breeds that you can like look out for and have fun trying to spot while you watch the movie.
If you want to hear about our hint for next week's video, then tune into the in-depth analysis of Surf's Up and you'll get it there, because you don't get it in this one. Fuck you. You have to listen to the full one.
You gotta watch the longer one. Come on,
Yeah.
guys. We gotta sell you our content somehow.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening in. We've been Movie Magpies. See you next time.